Who got dress code? Schwacky?
Yeah.
For what?
Because his shirt said Budweiser.
Ah, Schwacky's special. All right, we're not going to wait very long for this because this is a longer PowerPoint. Well, I mean, it's a long PowerPoint.
Oh gosh, I'm the only one here.
What's up?
I'm the only one here.
There's more people coming in.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Well, we are going to go ahead. Make sure. Okay. All right. There we go. So this is should be working now. All right. So today we're going to talk about campaigns and elections. All right. And then this is the last unit toward, or the last chapter towards your second unit, and y'all will have your next test on Wednesday, right? So you have a reading quiz due tonight. Monday will be a discussion board. Tuesday will be the reply for discussion board. Wednesday will be a test. Thursday, your paper is due. And then Thursday, we'll get started with Unit 3. And then we should be back on pace now to not ever have to double up and have like 2 assignments due the same time, same day. Got it? Wonderful.
Wait,
What's up?
in the paper, like, you know how you list the amendment and then you have 800 like,
Correct.
what is the 800 that's basically saying,
The 800 is an argument for why we need to ratify your amendment.
and if we cite something, like, say you like, we cite something, does that count towards the 800 but not like the
Well, like if you're using quotes, if you're quoting something, yeah, that's toward your 800 words. Okay. And I'm going to tell you right now, one of the problems, or one of the things that I find most commonly problematic with college kids' papers these days, like with y'all's papers, whether it's in my AP class or this class, y'all don't understand how to like write your own paper. Like y'all don't understand how to formulate an argument yourself. Y'all don't understand how to use your own mind. And inevitably what I end up with is a paper that is 50% or 60% quotes from other people. I don't want to know what other people think. Other people aren't in my class. I want to know what you think.
Yeah, if you take like the say like one of the quote and you
Here's the thing. Honestly, I would tell you don't even use a quote. Like, instead of quoting somebody's exact words, just tell me basically what they said real briefly. Put a little citation in there because that's what Chicago style is meant for, right? So, Locke's Treatise of Man, or Treatises of Government, Locke's Natural Rights. Like, you put your little footnote right there, and then at the bottom, like where you got that, so that I can, as a professor, as a reader, as somebody that's looking at your paper, if in the event that I need more information, then I can go to that source and look it up because you've got the page numbers and the source and all that stuff, right? But yeah, I would tell you, like, don't, you got 800 words. If a quarter of your paper, if 200 of those 800 words is quoted material from somebody else, now you just used 600 words to make your argument. Because it's your argument, it's your amendment, it's your argument. I care about what y'all think. Okay? Because I need you as a student to be able to formulate and articulate an opinion. Yes, ma'am.
So it's just minimum 800 words?
No, 800 is, in fact, if you read the instructions, you have 800 words. Like, exactly, you have 800 words. But, because I don't expect you to be like 800 on the dot, you actually have a 10% grace in either direction, which means that in reality, your paper needs to be between 720 words and 880 words. Okay? And that's, 160 words is a full paragraph. Okay? So that gives you a fair amount of leeway in that regard. All right? Okay, so.
Question.
Who's that? Elijah?
Yes. So is there an option in Word to put that like little one thing that you're talking about?
Yes. So when you're in Word, at the very top of Word, it's the tab is called References. If you click on Reference, then there's a little thing in the menu bar underneath that will say Add Footnote. And you click Add Footnote, and wherever the cursor is, the little one will pop up. And then at the bottom of your paper, they'll draw a little line, and it'll have that little one, and that's where you type in like Baker Philip, right, or Locke John, right, and then treatises of government, right, because that's the title of the book, and then the publisher, the publication location, and then the page numbers. But one of the things that it does is it creates a way for you to not have to I don't need you to have a bibliography or a works cited page, because you will give me the full citation the first time you use it in Chicago style, right? Like Chicago style automatically does that or forces you into doing that. That way I'm not asking you for a bibliography or a works cited page. Okay?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's try to, again, this is long. We're going to try to get through as much of this as we can. All right. So elections, voting, campaigning. This is our biggest opportunity to participate in our democracy. Okay. It affords you the opportunity to have a voice or a say in government. And then theoretically, it gives you an opportunity to sort of change government and impact government by electing officials that will behave or engage in behaviors that you find to be advantageous, right? The reality is once you start counting like local levels, there are tens of thousands of elected officials that we elect at various intervals, whether it's things like school board, or obviously President of the United States, which we all know about. Okay. Our elections occur on fixed dates. In fact, Election Day in the United States is the first Tuesday in November following the first Monday, which I realize can be a little confusing, but basically what that means is that Election Day must be November 2nd through the 8th. Okay, so if November 1st is a Tuesday, we do not cast our ballot on November 1st. We do not cast our ballot on the first day of the month, the 2nd through the 8th. Okay, congressional elections are held every 2 years, so we do have congressional elections at the same time we have presidential elections. But we also have what are referred to as midterms, which is the middle of a president's term, right? So we elect presidents in years that are divisible by 4, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012. We elect Congress in all even numbered years, 2000, 2002, 2004, 2006, 2008. What the midterms are 2, 6, 10, 14, 18. We are this year in a presidential election, so that is not a midterm election. Okay. Elections are actually run, they're administered by states, right? And then states, a lot of the times, what's the word I'm looking for? Delegate authority to local government, right? That's the word I was looking for, right? They delegate governments or delegate authority to local government. And so local government then ultimately is the one responsible for establishing polling places and establishing the provisions for how to vote, when to vote, where to vote, yada, 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 right? Types of elections. So in a primary, we have primaries. Primaries are basically a precursor to a general election. They're a way to ensure that we have two candidates in a general election because we don't want an election in which there's like 40 candidates, because if there's 40 candidates and everybody gets a handful of votes, then the winner is going to be somebody that didn't get very many votes at all, right? So we have primaries to whittle down the Republican field and whittle down the Democratic field to where we have one candidate of each that's running. And then we have third parties, but they don't ever get votes anyways. Closed primaries are primaries in which you have to be a registered member of that party in order to participate. Open primaries are where you can just show up and be like, I would like to vote in the Democratic primary, right? Texas, for instance, we have an open primary system. Okay, so this past spring, when I went and voted in March, I chose to vote in the This year, I chose to vote in the Democratic primary in 2020 because there was like 20 Democrats that were running. In 2016, during the primary process in 2016, I chose to vote in the Republican primary because the Republicans had like 20 some odd candidates and the Democrats only had 2 in 2016. So in an open system, you can go and switch year to year, right? Following a primary election comes the general election, and the general election is the person that actually assumes the office. There should probably be another slide in here, another bullet point in here that I'll need to go back and add that says a runoff election. And runoff elections occur between the primary election and the general election when primary stipulations aren't met, right? So for instance, in this year in 2020, I don't even know what year it is, doesn't work. In 2020, our House of Representatives, we have an open seat because our representative is a man named Pete Olson, and Pete Olson is retiring. He's not seeking re-election. And so there were a number of Republicans running because this is traditionally a Republican seat. Pete Olson is a Republican. None of the Republicans got 50% in the primary election, and therefore they had to have a runoff between the top 2 vote getters. Troy Nehls won that vote in July, right? So we had the primary in March, and then we had a runoff in July, and then we'll have a general election in November. Why is that not moving? There we go. All right. We have what's called a winner-take-all system. I'll use the term winner-take-all. There's some other terms for it. First past the post is another term that's sometimes used, but it's a result of single-member districts, which sometimes gets thrown in there as a part of this concept as well. So we do not have the opposite, or the opposition to a winner-take-all system is a proportional voting system. In a proportional voting system, you would basically vote for a party, and then whatever percentage of the vote that party got, that party would get that percentage of the seats. We have single-member districts, which leads to a winner-take-all system, where, for instance, in the House of Representatives in the 22nd District here in Texas, Troy Nehls is running against Shree Preston Kulkarni, and they will run against a couple of other like third-party candidates. Whoever gets a plurality of the vote, meaning the largest number of a subset, but not more than half. They're not necessarily more than half. They win, right? Like they win. In fact, this is how presidential elections are decided almost every time in almost every state. I do say almost. Well, no, that's probably not. That's not true, because there's a number of states that one candidate absolutely receives a majority. Your swing states, however, one candidate generally does not receive a majority of the votes, especially when you have viable third-party candidates. Okay? Majority system says that they have to get basically 50% or 50.1%, like you have to be one vote over 50%. That's the requirement to win the Electoral College. Okay? The Electoral College is a majority system. There are 538 votes in the Electoral College. Half of those is 269. So in order to win the presidency, you must receive 270, one more than half, Electoral College votes. Okay? A plurality system simply means the largest subset. So if there's like 7 people running and the highest vote total is 35%, that person got a plurality and they win. Okay? Proportional system. That's what I just went over. We don't have a proportional system in the United States. That's actually really something that you see in like England. England is a decent example. If you ever want to compare the United States and the English system, England has a proportional system in which you vote for their various parties. Ballots in the U.S., ballots are no longer provided by the party, although the parties do have significant say in who ends up on the ballot. It used to be that they were provided by the individual parties, and then the individual parties but essentially it led to something called straight ticket voting. You can still straight ticket vote, although most Americans do not anymore, right? But when you turn 18, the first time you go into a polling location and the first time you sign into one of those little machines, at the very top, it will have a thing that says just Republican or Democrat, and you can click one or the other, and then it will autofill everything else in for you, right? So if you are only like mildly politically engaged and you know that you're a Democrat or you know that you're a Republican and you know that you traditionally support those positions, you might straight ticket vote, especially in a year where you didn't necessarily like have opportunity or time to pay attention to everything else. By the 1900s, government is going to provide the ballots. We do have what's called the long form, and our ballots are ridiculously long. You can't, like I said, you can still vote straight party, but we do have basically all of the candidates that are running for an individual office on the ballot, on the same ballot at the same time. So again, for President of the United States, for instance, you get the Republican candidate, the Democratic candidate, the Libertarian candidate, the Green Party candidate, the Constitutional Party candidate, and then maybe some like independent party candidates or some write-in candidates or whatever. But it's very, very, our ballots are very long. Ballots do vary from country to country. I don't really care about other countries. We're obviously looking at American government. For the most part now in the United States, we vote electronically. We have like computerized machines that do it. And part of the reason is because we used to have paper ballots. Paper ballots can be problematic because people are stupid. I mean, people are just sometimes they're just not, they don't pay attention. So there are instances in which people have like bubbled in all of the candidates for an individual office, right? Like in 2000 is the really good example of this because in 2000, the presidential election of 2000, specifically in Florida, found like there's some ridiculous statistics, like 70,000 people voted for everybody but George Bush. And then like 30,000 people voted for everybody but Al Gore. And another like 20,000 people voted literally for everybody, right? So we do try to, we've gone more and more toward the digital age. There's some fear now of of hacking voting booths, but your actual voting machines, they're not internet, they're intranet, right? So like they talk to one another, but they don't talk to anything outside of that system. When we talk about Russia hacking the election, can they get into databases and get like voter registration information? Yes. Like they can hack that. Did they hack Hillary's emails? Yes. Did they go in and actually change people's votes? No. There's absolutely no evidence of that. Okay. Yeah, clearly you see on the left how confusing that can be. Like, you know which little hole to punch out?
I watched my parents vote, and it was really confusing. I didn't like know because it
Yeah.
was so long.
Well, now like the digital ballots are supposed to make it a little bit easier because you just push for the one person that you want. You push on their actual name rather than having to like punch something out like a punch card or whatever. Again, we're trying to simplify the prospects, right? Legislative elections, so our elections for like the House and the Senate. The Senate is obviously statewide, so that's the boundary for the state. For the House, there are districts. Those districts are drawn every 10 years. In fact, we will redraw districts next year. So every 10 years, like on the decade 2010, 2020, we have a census. You might have seen like mailers come to your parents that ask them to fill out the census information, like how many people live in your house, yada, yada, yada. We have to have proportional representation. That's one of the requirements of our system. So as people move around the United States, we have to redistribute congressional seats, essentially. So, for instance, after 2010's census, the state of Texas picked up 4 additional seats in the House of Representatives, right? After 2020, Texas will probably pick up another 3 or maybe 4 more seats in the House of Representatives because more and more and more people have continued to move into Texas. Okay? Redrawing these districts is known as redistricting. And then how you redistrict is sometimes controversial, right? But the states are in charge of controlling those boundaries. Some important key court decisions about it. Baker versus Carr says that the national government can come in and dictate to the states how they draw those boundaries. And for the important reason of ensuring that there's proportional representation, right? And that's where this concept of one person, one vote comes from. Okay? Essentially, all congressional districts have roughly 700,000 people in them. Now, that's not 100% true because you have Wyoming, for instance. Wyoming only has like 500,000 people that live in the state. But they have to have one representative. So one representative represents all 500,000. Redistricting actually gets really political, and it's sort of complex because if the state governments are redrawing these districts every 10 years, and the state governments are obviously controlled at the time by one of the 2 parties, and so those parties try to actually create districts that have a partisan advantage. This concept is called gerrymandering, or perhaps it actually should be pronounced gerrymandering. It's always pronounced gerrymandering, but it comes from Elbridge Gerry, who is he's almost one of the founding fathers, right? He's like one of the very, very early politicians in America, and he draws some really weird districts in the state of Massachusetts when he's the governor there. One of them, they say it looks like a salamander, and so it's Gary's mander, right? It's Gary's salamander, which ends up becoming gerrymandering or gerrymandering, right? That's where that comes from. The video, the image on the right This is actually from Chicago, but you will see an electoral district basically in the state of Chicago that's pretty wonky. And it's drawn that way. Generally, districts are drawn either to do one of two things, and it's called cracking or packing, right? So you're either trying to like break up members of a party and spread them out into other districts to weaken their vote, or you're trying to pack them all into one district to create a super district. Okay. Ultimately, what this results in is it results in sort of unfair elections and safe seats. North Carolina is actually a really good example of this right now because North Carolina is what we refer to as a purple state, meaning North Carolina is almost equally Republican and Democrat. In 2018, during the midterm elections in 2018, the Democrats received slightly more, just ever so slightly, more votes than Republicans did across all congressional voting lines, right? So when you count up the total votes for Republican versus the total votes for Democrat in congressional races in North Carolina in 2018, the Democrats came out slightly ahead. There are 13 districts in the state of North Carolina. Anybody want to venture a guess as to how many the Democrats won? They won 3. They won 3 seats despite receiving a majority of the vote, or a plurality of the votes. Despite receiving more votes than the Republicans, the Democrats won 3 seats and the Republicans won 10 because of gerrymandering. All right. Presidential nominations. The nomination process is the first process in the presidential process. So you have to be nominated first. That revolves campaigning and primaries and elections, primaries and caucuses. Although in reality, we probably should talk about, and I wish there was a slide for this, there is in one of my other PowerPoints, the invisible primary process in which people are sort of campaigning and feeling out whether or not they have a chance of obtaining the nomination. The invisible primary system is almost continuous now in this day and age, right? There was an article that came out a week and a half ago that said Tucker Carlson was going to be the 2024 Republican presidential candidate. Like, just let that sink in for a second. The Republicans are already sort of speculating as to who the candidate will be in 2024. We haven't even had a 2020 election yet, right? Like, that's how continuous this cycle has become. A caucus is different than a primary, and you do need to understand the difference between the two. In a primary, you just go into a voting booth and you cast a vote. Caucuses are different because they're participatory. They're actually like more engaging. You basically meet in a specific location, and then you go and you gather together with a whole bunch of people that want to vote for the same person you want to vote for. And then you can actually end up in situations where there's like multiple votes. It's a very like complicated process. Once you get past the primary process, we get to the conventions. There are conventions every 4 years. Those conventions are the official nominating conventions, in which case in August, Donald Trump was officially nominated as the candidate for the Republican Party, and Joe Biden was officially nominated as the candidate for the Democratic Party. Okay. Used to be that like the states would just pick the people that went. Now the primaries and the caucuses basically dictate what delegates go. And then those delegates, it's almost like its own little mini electoral college. Those delegates go to the convention and they cast votes on behalf of the various candidates. The convention, though, is significant in the sense that the convention officially welcomes the vice presidential candidate to the ticket. And conventions also set the party platform, and we'll talk about that in more detail next unit when we talk about parties. Okay. When we go to the actual presidential election in November, we're not voting for the president. We're actually voting for the electors that vote for the president. The Electoral College is what actually votes for the president, and they vote sometime in December, and I forget exactly when. I want to say maybe it's the third Saturday in December is when the Electoral College gets together to vote. The Electoral College decides the president unless the Electoral College does not come up with a majority, which almost never happens, especially not in our like our two-party state. We do have some democracy in our elections. Again, our elections are actually representative, like we're electing people to go and represent us. But we do have initiatives, referendums, and recalls that are actual direct democracy. An initiative is a proposed law that's put on the ballot by citizens. Okay? A referendum is a proposed law that is put on the ballot by government. But in both cases, the people get to vote for themselves. Right. So years and years and years ago, when I was living in California, there was a referendum on the ballot for legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes. And this would have been like 2008. Right. So you could have voted to legalize marijuana way back then. Okay, but that's what a referendum is. A recall is, again, democracy, but it's a little bit different because with a recall, you're actually basically kicking somebody out of office. You're removing somebody from their office early. It's almost like a what's the word I'm looking for? A citizen-initiated impeachment, right? Gray Davis, the governor of California in 2003, was impeached, which actually led to Arnold Schwarzenegger taking over. Like that's how Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California, because he won the recall election. California not long ago actually initiated a recall on a judge in San Jose who was the judge that presided over the Brock Turner case. So any elected official can be recalled. You don't know who Brock Turner is, right? No, that's sad. He's the Stanford swimmer. No, like the kid from Stanford that like raped that girl and went to prison for 3 months. You don't know about that? Yeah, literally a white boy raped a girl at Stanford. Like date rape? I don't know. Like I don't. She was drunk. He was drunk, but not that excuses him. She was drunk. He sexually assaulted her. Like 2 Swedish foreign exchange students broke it up, like stopped it as it was happening, like tackled the dude. Cops came. He was put on trial, and the judge gave him 6 months. He served 3 of those and then was released because he was like an Olympic caliber swimmer. So I guess if you swim fast enough, you shouldn't go to prison. I don't know. And campaigning, you have to campaign in order to win. Basically, when you're campaigning, you're looking for people to back you financially. That's donors. People to back you in sort of like helping you campaign. That would be activists, and then people backing you in the sense of the actual voters. Incumbents, those are the people that are already in office. They have significant advantage when it comes to campaigning and re-election, and there's a wide number of those advantages. Some of those advantages, and I don't know if I have a slide, don't remember if I have a slide in this PowerPoint that lists all of them, but like the advantages are all sorts of things like being well known and having access to more money and all of that wonderful stuff. Consultants are just people that work for the campaign, and they can have a wide number of jobs. I'm going to let you read through that on your own because this is a long PowerPoint and we don't have that much time. Fundraising, again, if you want to win, you got to raise money. You got to raise lots of money. Depending on the campaign office that you're seeking, the more prominent or the more nationally sort of well known the office is, the more money you have to raise. But people that are already in office, especially in Congress, they can raise way more money than people that are not currently in Congress. Okay. How to campaign? A grassroots campaign basically means that the people are mobilized, and like it's very people intensive. Like individual people are trying to like work for you and help you and get other people to support you. Media is very, very important in campaigns because media is obviously how you reach people. It used to be predominantly television. Social media is actually becoming more and more important now. Town halls are actually back on the rise. Like you're seeing more town halls now than what we have in the past. But town halls used to be the idea of politicians like meeting with their constituencies and trying to like deliver messages to them and interact with them and get them to help. All right. Yeah, that buy ad, that's just, again, using media. Okay. The debates, okay, so generally the debates are presidential in nature. Most people don't pay attention to the littler debates. Although like in 2018, Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz did have, I think, 4 debates themselves throughout Texas for that Senate campaign. I will tell you this, debates have actually gotten significantly more entertaining, especially primary debates, because there's like 20 people on stage and they're all like clamoring for attention and they all want to talk, and it's like a 2-hour-long debate. Do you realize how long that means you actually get to talk? Like seriously, 12 people or 10 people on a stage and it's a 2-hour-long debate, that's 120 minutes. If everybody got to speak for the same amount of time, that would be like 12 minutes a person, except you have to take out commercials. So then that cuts that down. And then you have to realize that it's not equal and not everybody gets to speak the same amount of time. And then you literally end up with people that were on stage for 2 hours and they spoke for a total of like 5 minutes. It's kind of comical. In 2016, there was a dude named Ben Carson who like begged. He actually begged. Like he was on stage and he was like, somebody, please insult me. Will somebody please insult me? Because the only way that you could speak in the Republican primary debates in 2016 is if somebody insulted you. And then the moderator was like, whoa, hold on. You insulted Dr. Carson. He gets to rebut. He gets to speak. So Ben Carson was literally looking at everybody on stage and be like, please insult me, please. I want to speak. Right? They're also kind of entertaining because like in 2016, Donald Trump and Marco Rubio had a whole like 5-minute back and forth over the size of Donald Trump's hands and whether that equated to the size of something else. Like Americans did this on live national television. By the way, have you ever seen Donald Trump drink something? It's like, this is how he drinks. Which I can only imagine people with tiny hands drink that way. I don't know that. I don't know if it's fact, right? Never been around him. Don't know the size of his hands. Micro targeting is just creating very, very specialized sort of campaigns directed at very, very specialized groups. Campaigning has become so detailed now that it's really like a science and an art at the same time. Like you're trying to gather so much information to make very, very specific ads for very, very specific groups that you're trying to garner support from. Campaigns poll all the time. They actually do their own like independent polling or internal polling to try to like figure out how the public is supporting them and what they do. Like Donald Trump, believe it or not, Donald Trump actually polls on his like nicknames that he gives people. Right? Like he actually conducts, like his campaign conducts internal polls for like, how well does Crooked Hillary go over? Like, do people like that nickname or do they not like that nickname? Right? Like Sleepy Joe, right? Or Basement Joe Biden, right? Like Trump actually like polls all of that stuff, which is a little ridiculous. Okay, money in politics. Here's basically what you need to know about money in politics. It's ballooned. It is unbelievably large now. That really sucks, and it probably shouldn't be that way. But Citizens United versus the FEC says that money is the equivalent of free speech. If I've got $1 billion and or actually let's use Mike Bloomberg, because Bloomberg is a good example. That dude is filthy rich, filthy stinking rich, right? He just committed $100 million of his own money, $100 million of his own money to buy up a whole bunch of commercial ads in Florida on television to support Joe Biden, right? That's $100 million of him supporting Joe Biden in the general election. And he can do that because it's his money. And that's free speech. That's his free speech. He's allowed to do that. That probably sucks because that's not great. But yeah. Sources, individual donors, like that's what Bernie's talking about. Like he's so proud of his like $1.3 million or 1.3 million individual donors that all donated an average of like $17.86. Like good for him. Okay. PACs or political action committees, they're giving money to congressional candidates predominantly. Political parties will actually help give money to candidates in order to get them elected. But then we get what are called super PACs. And super PACs are where it gets really dicey because that's dark money with like unlimited money. I'm going to post a little video for you from the Stephen Colbert. Y'all know who Stephen Colbert is? So he's a comedian who's fairly political. Stephen Colbert, as a joke, actually created a super PAC. And then because he thought it was funny, like kept it going and like actually started fundraising for his super PAC. Individual donors, we do have some limitations on those. You can look through those yourself. But I do need you to understand, like, the amount of money that can be given is somewhat complex because, like, you can give money to the primary. Like, you can give money to a candidate for their primary election, and then you can give money to them again if they had a runoff election, and you give money to them again for a general election, even though we, like, cap how much you can give them, right? PACs, I know I'm going really fast, and I'm sorry, but we're, like, only halfway through the slides, and there's like 10 minutes left. PACs are basically groups they're groups, so they're almost like an interest group, but they're organized as like businesses or labor organizations or whatever that are supporting candidates. Super PACs can basically be anything. The only difference with super PACs is they can't coordinate. That's the big thing. And like I said, I'm gonna post that video. I want you to watch that video. It's not very long. How voters decide. For the most part, I thought I had more time than this. Dang. All right. Here's what's going to happen then. I'm going to post the PowerPoint, and then I kind of need you to go through the rest of it on your own. And I'll make. I will record during my conference today, 7th period, and try to finish this for you. All right. All right. Thanks, guys. All right, y'all can go. Sorry for talking the whole time. Love you, mean it. Get your paper done. Make sure your paper gets done. All right, bye. What's up? Who called my name?
I said bye.
What's up?
Okay, for my.
Okay, so we're back. Let's make sure this is where we were. I'm pretty sure we went through super PACs, didn't we? Yeah, super PACs can't coordinate. That's the big thing that you need to know about super PACs. They have to be independent. But again, I told you I would post that little video for you today, and I will. It goes over that. I actually think we did this one too. So how they vote. Issue voting is basically prospective or retrospective. So you're looking at how you think. Perspective is how you think a candidate will deal with issues. Retrospective is for people like Biden who have been in office. He's a career politician. He's been around for 40 some odd years as a public servant. we know what his record is. Partisan loyalty is a factor. In fact, it's actually the most common indicator of how you're going to vote. If you identify as Republican, you probably vote Republican. Characteristics of the candidate are actually becoming more important these days. We tend to have we have more candidate-centric elections. On some level, it ends up being sort of almost like a popularity contest. Not to take anything away from Obama, but I mean, that was one of the things with him is people all the time were like, oh, I'd love to have a beer with the guy. Like he's fun. He's nice. Like, I'm sure he's great. Like, he and I both love college basketball. I'm sure we could sit down and have a couple of beers and watch some games and talk college basketball, and we would never even discuss politics or issues. So it's hard to know whether or not we would agree or but to me, I mean, that has no bearing. Like, likability has no bearing on whether or not you're qualified to run the government. This just gives you the party identification. Again, I'm going to flip through any sort of these fairly quickly. By all means, pause and look at them if you'd like. But these are just some of the different sort of indicators. 2016, obviously we know that this was Clinton versus Trump. At the time, right? So like, this is going to say Trump won a surprise victory. At the time, it was a surprise. The vast majority of us did not believe that Donald Trump could be successful. I think that as more has come out and more time has passed, we actually are not nearly as surprised by a Trump victory as what we used to be. Now I say that, and then you see sort of the same polls now. They're saying Biden's running away with it. I mean, maybe we didn't learn anything from 4 years ago. 2018 midterms, the Democrats regained control of the House. Some people say that that's an indicator of how bad Trump is. That's actually a fairly common occurrence, right? The party that is in the White House generally loses seats in Congress during the midterm election because Americans have a very short attention span, and we're very, what have you done for me lately kind of people. Like, we expect instantaneous responses from government. We think things should instantaneously get better when the president's elected, and that generally doesn't happen. And so there's usually a little bit of a backlash with that. We have seen over the last, 92, I think it was 92, 94, 92, we call that the year of the woman. We have seen more and more women becoming successful in Congress or running successful campaigns. The reality is that the Congress has gotten more diverse over the last few years. When it comes to 2018, the Republicans held on to the Senate, which wasn't really a surprise to anybody, in part because the number of seats up in the Senate were there weren't very many Republicans that were up for re-election in that cycle, so it was easier for them to hold on to seats. Right, this is just a breakdown of states that voted for Trump in 2016, and that's just blown up. Again, you can look through these on your own if you'd like to. We're getting into who donates now. And one of the things you'll realize is obviously not that many people donate to political campaigns. Most of us don't have the money. Obviously, as you notice, the wealthier you are, the more likely people are to donate. But even then, even amongst like the quote unquote wealthy, we're not generally giving away our money to campaigns. Okay. How many opinions? Okay, so there's a lot of visuals in this. I didn't realize how many visuals were in it. I will say this is a fairly good one for you to sort of look over. And I know it's really small on the screen, but it gives you the sort of steps
in running for president of the United States or becoming president of the United States. Because obviously it ends down there with the inauguration where you're actually inaugurated and become president. But it's a long process, and it's a process that takes it's constantly ongoing. Like we're always looking for the next president. Again, another electoral college map from 2016. Various advertisements. I'm actually probably going to link to a website as well that I in fact, we'll see if I can't embed a couple of videos into a page and see how that works for you. The debates, we're actually getting set to have those. I think the first one is in about 10 days. But they can be relatively significant. The Kennedy-Nixon one that's on here is relatively significant. This is the first televised debate. And it was actually kind of comical if you go back and you had listened, or if you take and looked at the polling data afterwards. Those who listened on the radio thought Nixon won. Those who watched on television thought Kennedy won. We talk about who wins debates anymore. The reality is declarations of winners in debates is highly partisan anymore these days. Campaign staff, obviously you need a ton of it. If you want to be successful, it takes a ton of people to run a successful campaign, especially a national campaign like president. The email leak, I mean, it's probably worth mentioning, but I don't think anybody really cared about it. Like, I mean, some of the things that they should have known, I mean, some of the things that people should have cared about with the DNC email leak, they just don't. I mean, Hillary, there's a leaked email that says Hillary is telling her people that basically you have one position in private and one position in public for the same issue. Like, I mean, she just admits, like, we're going to lie to the people about this and we're going to tell them this, but then we're actually going to do B. Additionally, with the DNC leaks, we know that they actually, I mean, they intentionally like prohibited or limited or minimized Sanders' chances. We actually know that they had a whole campaign lined up, basically saying you can't trust Bernie the Jew. I mean, it was going to get real anti-Semitic if Bernie had continued to linger and stick around. So, I mean, it's at least worth noting. Obviously, you make campaign promises. Some promises you actually attempt to make good on. Some promises you don't attempt to make good on. You know, you go to the Trump campaign and they kept chanting, lock her up, lock her up. Trump had no intention of ever locking Hillary Clinton up. Yes. We know for a fact Hillary broke the law. Like, I mean, you can think what you want about her emails, but she went before Congress and she said that she did not send any classified material on her private server. James Comey then came out like 3 weeks later and was like, well, it was 13 emails out of like 300,000, right? 13. Well, okay, Clinton lied. I mean, that's a lie. I mean, she tried to say that they weren't marked classified at the time. Comey was saying, no, 13 of them were marked classified at the time. But nobody's going to lock her up for that. Nobody locks up people for lying, not even lying to Congress. And I mean, it's not like a Hillary issue. Like Rafael Palmeiro, a baseball player, went before Congress to testify about steroid use in baseball. And he sat there and said, I've never done steroids. And a week later, he failed a steroids test. So, I mean, but perjury is one of those things that is a crime, doesn't really matter anymore. But most campaign promises are the intent is to actually fulfill them, right? Now, obviously, what ends up happening is something like Donald Trump's wall, his big, beautiful wall. Yeah, he said, like, listen, even if He tried to build it. He was never going to get Mexico to pay for it. That doesn't mean he wasn't trying to make Mexico pay for it in a variety of ways. But ultimately, what ends up happening is Congress. I mean, the president doesn't have the authority to do it. In fact, the presidents make all sorts of promises that they don't actually have the authority to do. And then when you end up in a situation like Obama for the majority of his presidency, or Trump now for the last 2 years, where you have a Congress that's of the opposite party and really is just doing whatever they can to stop you, you don't get anything accomplished. Yeah, it's gotten dirty now. One, politics loves a good scandal. Loves a good scandal. But the reality is, I mean, sex sells, like dirt sells. The more you can sort of sensationalize it, and the more politics looks like a Hollywood movie, or really like a Lifetime movie. Was it Lifetime Movie Network, Lifetime Network movies? Whatever, like a Lifetime movie, or yeah, I think it's Lifetime. I don't know, whatever my wife watches. You know what I mean? But those where it's like just the things that are based on true stories that are so ridiculous. You're like, how would anybody actually do this? Politics loves stuff like that. Media loves stuff like that because it brings attention to things, right? So the more scandal that you can have, the better. The more that you can get that to be prominent, the better off you are. The white working class, this is actually one of the sort of voting blocks that's probably most misunderstood, but it's also one of the most important voting blocks, because if you can get the white working class, you're pretty much guaranteed to win. For a long time, Democrats had the white working class, and they really sort of don't anymore. Working class whites tend to be more Republican now, and so I think some of that is some general uneasiness with sort of economic policy of Democrats, specifically when it pertains. I mean, when you look at working class whites, what we're talking about is people that work factory jobs, or like where I come from in West Virginia, coal miners. Like that's the working class white. Well, people like Hillary Clinton went into West Virginia and was like, we're going to get rid of coal. Okay, great. You say that in California because Californians love to hear that. Why would you go into West Virginia where the only industry there is coal mining and be like, we're going to get rid of coal because it's dirty and it's not clean? You're basically just looking at all of those voters and being like, by the way, I'm going to kick you out on your ass. We're going to take your job. You're going to lose all your money. You're going to probably lose your home. But the air will be cleaner. I mean, when you're starving, I don't think you really care about the cleanliness of the air. Like, I mean, personally, I've never been starving, so I can't say that with 100% certainty. But I would guess that. And there's actually some evidence that the vast majority, well, not the vast majority, a significant percentage of people do vote with sort of with their wallet. Like they vote on economic issues, right? So if you're going to make it to where they can't make their mortgage payment, no, they're not going to vote for you. So the March for Our Lives was one of the sort of Trump backlashes, and so I would say that, like, it's important to understand, simply because it's political participation, and it's a way to try to rally some support when your candidate loses, but. I mean, I'm not sure that it's 100% necessary in this individual unit. I think this is probably better suited for civil rights and civil liberties and the right to peacefully assemble and protest. But again, I do think that it's at least valuable in the sense that that it is participation, and it is an avenue of participation when your vote is unsuccessful, for lack of a better term. So that brings us to the end of this.
Hopefully the editing puts this together. So this is just one video.
And makes it somewhat easy for you. You're obviously welcome to go back and look at, and I would advise you to go back and look at some of those images, some of the statistics, because they'll actually sort of give you some ideas as to who's voting, who's giving money to campaigns, stuff like that. All right, but good luck on your reading quiz tonight. Shouldn't be a problem. Make sure you have your paper done by next week.